Okay, Arlo and Frank. Here we are out in the ocean again. There's supposed to be whales and dolphins and stuff like that swimming around out there. I have not seen any marine mammals. I've been on the lookout. And hopefully as we get closer to the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea, we'll have more chances to see. There's even supposed to be orcas out here, which I've never seen in the, well, I might have seen one time in Mexico. I was in the surf, so when I saw the fin, I kind of went the other way. So maybe I saw one, but I didn't really get to observe one. I'd like to do that on this trip. But I found that mostly what I see is flying fish, and there's a zillion of them. Problem is, they're not going to fly up 8 stories into the air so that you see them go past the back of my head. We're going on a great adventure. That adventure is going to take us to Africa, Lord willing. We're going to dock in Rome in a few days. We're in day 10 right now. Day 15, we get off the boat. Grandmother agreed to take one flight if it was a short flight and if it would make the trip much easier. And so we're going to fly from Rome to Barcelona. We love Barcelona. We're going to spend 3 days there, but those 3 days are going to be in preparation to go to Africa. We're going to drive down the eastern coast of Africa, ditch the car, go into Morocco, do buses and trains in Morocco, and then come back up, rent another car, take it up through Portugal, up to northern Spain, ditch the car there, take a ferry over to Bordeaux, I think it is. Then we're gonna take a train into Paris. We love Paris as much as Barcelona. I would rather live in Barcelona than Paris, but I like Paris more than Barcelona. It's my favorite city in the world. And then we're gonna rent a car after maybe a week in Paris and just go up through Europe, maybe into Switzerland a little bit, up to Amsterdam. I'll smoke a couple doobies where it's legal. Although I don't think you should be smoking doobies, but I'm 68 years old. I can do it. I could probably get a prescription for it back home. I'm sure I have something that pot either cures or makes you not care about. And then we're gonna hop over to England. We're gonna take the Channel. We're gonna take the car back to Paris. And I think we're gonna ride an overnight bus into the Channel and into London. And then we have several things to do there. I wanna go up to Stratford upon Avon. I'm a huge Shakespeare fan, which I'll talk to you guys about on another talk. And we're gonna do some things in London. We've been there before, we like London. It wasn't a place that we were, hey, we gotta go back to London. But the ship sails back to New York City from Southampton in July. Now, right now, it is the end of April. We don't leave to come back to the United States until the end of July. The whole trip is going to take us somewhere between, I think, 112 and 115 days to complete from the day we left Jacksonville Beach for Fort Lauderdale to get on this ship until we turn the key in our house and walk back into it. But I'm not here to talk to you about any of that. I'm just kind of updating you. I'm here to talk to you about another ship. I think I was about 8 years old when the USS Kittyhawk was opened up for display. They had an open house. The public was welcome to come on the USS Kittyhawk, the brand new nuclear submarine for the US Navy. And I thought it would be really cool to go and see it. Now my dad was working that day. My dad worked a lot. He loved me and did a lot of stuff with me, but there were times that he couldn't do stuff. But I had my Grandpa Weber. You're a great grandpa. So I talked to him and he said, sure, we'll go. Now, I told you about the Webers a few of these sessions ago. My grandpa walked everywhere. He never drove a car, walked with his head down. He was a prolific walker, and I was a little kid. So the plan was that we were going to head out of our house and get on some sort of public transportation, which would eventually lead to us being on the Broad Street subway. So we probably took the 25 bus to the Gerard L station and got on the Frankfurt L and got off at City Hall, walked over and got on the Broad Street subway and went as far south as it would go. I'm sure it went as far as Oregon Avenue, and it might have gone to Patterson, although the new stadiums weren't built down there yet, but there was an old stadium. So however far it took us, it didn't take us all the way, and then we had to walk to the Naval Shipyard. I was there one other time, much later. In fact, I was there a few times much later because I ran this race down Broad Street. It was a 10-miler called the Broad Street Run, where you went to the very top of Broad Street and then you finished in the Naval Yard. I don't know if either of your fathers did it, but your Uncle Sam did it at least once, because I remember maybe about 7 miles into it, I noticed Sam in front of me, and I was closing in on him. And I said, don't look back, Sam. There might be a freight train gaining on you. And I passed him and beat his butt. And I never let him forget that. And now it's captured on video forever. Forever I can boast. I kicked your butt in that race, Sam. Sam was a pretty good runner. And 10 miles is a long way to run. So I wanted to go there. But I didn't just want to go tour this boat. I wanted to be part of the action. My grandfather Weber had been in the Merchant Marine, so he knew his way around boats. He was in the Merchant Marines in World War I. Now you always hear about Japanese people who were put in internment camps in World War II because they were afraid that they would side with their people from back in Japan. But in World War I, German people who hadn't been here that long, and that included my grandpa and his family, they weren't allowed to be in the military. They didn't put them in camps, but they weren't allowed to be in the military. So he joined the Merchant Marine because that's the only option that he had. They weren't even allowed to be in the Coast Guard if there was one. So he went to what he could, and actually was in harm's way on ships that were being hunted down by German warships. I don't know if they had submarines in World War I, but they were being hunted down by ships. And my dad, he served in World War II. He was in the Coast Guard. We still had his uniforms at the house. So we had a dress blue uniform that had, we call him a Donald Duck hat. It's this blue hat with a ribbon around it. It said U.S. Coast Guard in gold on the front, and the ribbon kind of hung down the back. And you wore that with your dress blue, which is kind of like a suit that you would dress up in to go to church. It had your rank and everything on it, and it looked really cool. But then we also had his whites, which were your everyday work clothes. They had bell bottoms that came out, and I forget what the reason was that, like, Navy people, they call them swabbies because they swab decks down, the people in the Navy who were enlisted men. But they all had these pants on, and then it was a white work shirt. So I wasn't going to wear a suit, but I convinced my mom to let me wear his whites, which were now light brown because they had been sitting around since sometime in the mid-1940s, and now it was like 20 years later, almost 20 years later. And they weren't made out of the kind of things that uniforms are made out of now. They last forever now. Back then, they deteriorated. So this thing was a hot mess. We had the belt from it, and it wasn't a belt that had the holes in it. It was a belt that you could make as tight as you wanted. You could have it that much of a circle around your waist if you could pull it that tight, because it just had this housing that the belt would go through, and there was this circular thing that would catch it. So however far you pulled it, it was stuck there. So she shortened, my mom shortened the pants so that I wouldn't trip over them. But they were pants for a grown-ass man. And I was a little boy. And I looked pretty silly. I wish that there was a picture someplace, and I'm sure there was at one time, a picture of someplace of me going out the door to visit the USS Kittyhawk with my grandpa. But we didn't have the white hat. That had been misplaced. So I had this dress hat on. Now, if I was in the Coast Guard and I showed up on an official Coast Guard base dressed like that, they would have thrown me in the brig for being out of uniform. But I was a little kid. So I had that hat on, and it was enormous. She stuffed some newspaper in there so it would cling to my head. And my grandpa picked me up, and I remember him laughing his ass off. Like, look at you, you look great. You look like you're in the Navy there, kid. So we went on our great adventure. And it took us forever to get down there. And I remember the most amazing thing happened. We got to this enormous ship, and you had to walk on this gangplank to get on, and of course, there was a sailor there to greet you. And when I came up, the sailor piped me aboard. Sorry, I can't whistle. But there's this thing, when they pipe you aboard, that means you're allowed to come aboard. And he saluted and went, "Welcome aboard, Admiral." My grandpa was laughing his ass off. They gave me a personalized tour of that freaking boat with, I don't know, some officer. I have no idea who he was. However, he might have been a real admiral. And they just made my day. I got to eat in a mess and everything. And I just remember that after all these years. That was 60 years ago. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I won't be here forever. The reason that I'm doing these things is so that I can tell you, no, you, not you, my story in my words. Because these other folks that I'm telling you about, they got to tell me a certain amount of their story while they were alive. But they can't tell any more now. There's hardly any family photos even. I don't believe there's any videos like when the family went to Hawaii. I think my brother Richard was 4 and I was 11. I went surfing at Waikiki. It was pretty cool. And it was before I was a surfer. I got a surfboard the next summer when we came back to Stone Harbor. But none of that exists. But what does exist is what I remember, what I have stored inside. And so I'm going to take a little time over the next maybe year to do this series for you, so that when I'm gone, if you ever have a question that I can answer, maybe I've answered it. Maybe you'll go, hey, you know, he talked about that. I'm going to go watch that again. I'm also going to do some with my guitar and sing, although my voice is kind of gone after the throat cancer, but I'll at least get the message out. I'm going to do something called the soundtrack of my life, where I share songs, not songs that I necessarily played my whole life, but songs that either meant something to me in my life or remind me of other people. And I'm going to be doing that maybe for the next year or so. So I'm going to have quite a bunch of stuff for you guys to watch. If you never watch it, that's okay. But I would rather do it than not do it and have you wonder. Peace out, guys.